For those of you who have joined us online, we are grateful that you are able to join us. Thank you.
Ceux qui sont en ligne, nous sommes très reconnaissants que vous avez pu joindre cette réunion et ensuite engagement.
Okay. Just a second.
They mute the essay.
So today we have met here, both physically and online, to continue with our engagements on
Ici,
parliamentary advocacy opportunities to engage, understanding how Parliament works and opportunities to engage. And for those of you who have joined us online, please take note that we have our colleagues who are here in the room at the Country Lodge Hotel in Freetown in Sierra Leone. Recall that for those of you who joined us on Friday, we had our colleagues in Monrovia, Liberia in the room, while the rest of us joined online. You have been able to join us today, where in the room we have civil society organizations and media journalists from Sierra Leone joining us in the room. For those of you who are on the call, we'll also be very happy to know where you are joining us from. So in the chat box, if you could drop your name and the country you are joining us from, your name, the organization, and the country you are joining us from. Amadou Sise says, greetings from the Gambia. Yes, Amadou, thank you, you're welcome. So if you can hear me online, just as by way of a feedback, let's hear your name, the country you are joining us from, so that we are very clear with who is in the room, who is joining us from where. We have very major civil society organizations here in Sierra Leone joining us. Okay, Imoro Abdullahi says, I work with Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition based in Accra, Ghana. Okay, Abdullahi, Imoro, welcome. Who else is in the room? I can see a number of you, so we want to hear you. I know you are typing. While you type and I receive your messages, I just want those of us in the room to be able to also appreciate who and who has been able to join us. Aliu Bangura from Sierra Leone. Of course, he's not in the room, but he is joining us virtually. While the others come on, I will do well to announce that. My name is Sami Obing. I work as Executive Director for Parliamentary civil society organizations across the continent. We're based in Accra, Ghana. We also have Vivian Idepefo from FCT Nigeria, Awase from the Gambia, Verado from Star Ghana Foundation, and the list goes on and on. Whilst I recognize the rest, I would announce you. It means that you can hear me live on the online feed. So let me move on. Of course, for those of you who joined us last week, Friday, we mentioned that this training, this two-part training, is part of a full 5-day parliamentary advocacy course, which has been developed jointly by the West Africa Civil Society Institute, WACSI, in collaboration with the Parliamentary Network Africa. It runs for 5 days as a residential course at the WACSI Training Center in Accra. But for COVID, the physical version was not able to take place in 2020, and we are unable to do it in 2021 as well. So we are taking advantage of these learning and networking meetings to be able to have an abridged version of this legislative advocacy or parliamentary advocacy training, so that we can all have a feel of it. We are hoping that next year, by which time we would have been let off the claws of COVID-19 and all the things that it has brought to us, we may be able to meet physically to have this training. Do well to follow our respective social media pages. Once you register for some of these online trainings and physical trainings, you receive information about these trainings when the time is due. But in that physical training, some of the modules that we take for that full 5 days is what is displayed on your screen. We talk about things such as purpose, benefit, and risk of parliamentary advocacy. We speak about the basics of parliamentary practice and procedure as part of the course. We talk about types, structure, and administration of parliaments so that we are able to understand how our respective parliaments differ. We speak about the lawmaking process, how a bill becomes a law, how we are able to engage as civil society. We speak about the budget cycle, the role of legislature in the budget cycle. We talk about media engagement and parliamentary advocacy messaging as part of the course. We also talk about monitoring and evaluating parliamentary advocacy plans. We speak about creating sustainable networks for parliamentary advocacy, and this learning and sharing network, conversations is a baby of that. We talk about strategies for engaging legislators, principles of parliamentary openness and lobbying. And of course, we also speak about the role of parliament and its members. So it's a full bit that runs for full day, every day for 5 days. So obviously for Friday and today, 1 hour, 1.5 hours kind of thing. There is very little we could be able to cover, but we were doing well to make sure that at least, like Omolara said last Friday, we give you a good tip of the iceberg so that you can be able to understand what is meant. And just by way of a quick recap of what Omolara presented for those of us who have not been able to, who are not able to join on Friday, and the video will be available for you to watch. It will be shared to our respective emails as we have all registered accordingly. Omolara attempted to define advocacy in some very simple ways and forms, so that it can help put our parliamentary advocacy conversation in context. The first point is that advocacy is a deliberate process and not an event. So for all the things that we are thinking about on ways that parliaments can change, things that can get better and what have you, it is not a one-day, event. It doesn't come about with just this workshop or a couple of workshops. It's a deliberate attempt that runs for a couple of years sometimes. It can last for very long. One of the major advocacy platforms that I've been part of is Ghana's Civil Society Coalition on Right to Information. A thing where we are sitting, here in Freetown, and we are talking about the issue, and we are on one radio station or the other, and the print media is covering us. Meanwhile, the issue borders on the people in the counties and in the districts. Yet we are not engaging them. Advocacy works better when you are able to mobilize a lot more people to join in that effort. And advocacy involves deploying tactics and strategies. You got to have your full bouquet of tactics and strategies, you deploy the ones that are supposed to work at a particular period of time, you amend along the line, because remember that advocacy is a process and not an event. And finally, Omolara, recapping Omolara's presentation last week, we spoke about how advocacy is about providing evidence and then you move into action. So this is by way of a little recap of our presentation from last week. She asked a very important question to the people in the room and those who are joining online. And so for the benefit of those who are joining us now, let's just do this one quickly. Have you had an experience with engaging your national parliament or parliamentarians, and what was it like? So let me start with those of you in the room. Have you had an experience in engaging the Parliament of Sierra Leone on an advocacy campaign over the period? What was it like? So that we can share a few thoughts and experiences, so we can pass the microphone forward for anybody who wants to. For those of you who are online, if you also want to type in one or two, just to be able to give us an indication of some of the engagements you have done, we'll be willing to take that. Have you had an experience with engaging the Parliament of Sierra Leone, the Parliament of the Gambia, the Parliament of Ghana, wherever it is you are joining us from, and what was the experience like? Yes. One or two will be fine, and then we can move forward.
Yeah, I've had the experience of parliamentary, but then the experience was constant. Your entry points,
You can hear here. Hold on a second, please use my microphone.
entry points.
Yeah, go ahead.
Had the experience of working with we are finding laws or initially passed and we thought Parliament had little or nothing doing. So that was our entry point in engaging Parliament. But beginning to engage Parliament has different political parties with different interests. So engaging them was like, initially, the ruling government doesn't seem to understand where you are coming from. They want to ensure that you, once you come, they frustrate you in every manner. But then the opposition is always on the side of media and civil society when it comes to parliamentary work. So entering there, you have the majority always creating roadblocks and problems for you to engage. But you have to use different tools and skills in your advocacy to ensure that it happens. And so we also had a very good learning in engaging them. Then we understood that we have to have their Bible, which is the standing order, be our Bible when we wanted to engage Parliament. That was like my everyday document. I'll read it. Each time I want to engage, I ensure I do informal discussion and get to understand how do I connect the standing order with the constitution. Because the fiscal regime within the mining sector was also a problem. If you want to give gratis to a mining company, there is the section 110 in the constitution states that NRA or Ministry of Finance has to come for them to lift that portion for government to give gratis or to give waivers to companies. So all of those, you have to really understand your constitution. These are their standing orders. So those are some of the problems we had initially with them. But then when we knew that these were their Bibles, we also took them as our own Bible. And so we are all like parliamentarians working together at the end of the day. But they normally will not accept you coming to work with them. They will create a manner of problems. But with time, you find them as very good pals. You really learn a whole lot when they have confidence. There's also the issue of trust and confidence building. The work we do, whether it's media or civil society, people are watching from outside. And so most times they accept you from what they know or what they perceive about you. And so you have to do some deliberate efforts in ensuring that coming to meet with them, there is that trust, confidence and trust building. And then you can roll. Otherwise, it's important.
And this was comprehensive. I think that it's covered a lot of the areas that we'll be covering in the course of the next couple of minutes as we engage on this. The fact that the people you're advocating to, you must be able to understand the materials that they actually use. You should be able to, and for those of you who are online, I hope that you can see our screen. For those of you who are online, I hope that you can see our screen and you can hear us clearly. We will need your feedback so that we can be able to continue. But I think that it was useful. So Ben, let's continue. Now, having identified, understanding the standing orders of Parliament, understanding the constitution of the country, understanding that there is a lot of relationship building that needs to be done with members of Parliament and the staff of Parliament, understanding that it's a long haul. It's not just a one-off because you enter without much trust, but in the end, the trust will be built, subsequently. All of these plays out in the kind of work that can be done with Parliament. All right, so now we move straight to the next, have a conversation around, and let me move you to the context of my presentation. And the team that is navigating my screen for me, you are not helping me enough. Are you seeing the screen from those of you who are online? Yes, you can see the screen. Okay. All right, so now, having talked about advocacy generally, having done the recap of what advocacy is all about from the presentation that Omolara did the other time, can we now talk about it in specific reference to parliamentary advocacy and what it's about? So parliamentary advocacy refers to, working with individual lawmakers, working with the Parliament itself to initiate a change that responds to the specific needs of the population. That's generally about advocacy, working with people to cause the necessary change that needs to happen. It's also about influencing the introduction, enactment, and modification of legislation in the given country. A lot of the advocacy work that needs to be done with parliaments are our laws, because parliaments make laws. We may be having all the resources that there is to have. We may have very loud civil society organization that has a lot of mileage. We may have huge budgets. We may have huge staff, but we don't make laws. We can't make laws. The people that make laws are the parliamentarians. For us to be able to make sure that the laws that are made are ones that are serving the best interest of the people of Sierra Leone, Ghana, Gambia, wherever it is that you are joining from, you must be doing that in close collaboration and partnership with the people that actually have the mandate to make laws. But advocacy in Parliament goes beyond lawmaking. It is also about ensuring that representation is effective. The power of pairs function, as well as making sure that Parliament is playing its role effectively on overseeing the executive branch of government. All right. Now, what are the key elements? What are the key elements that are important for us to take note of while we are doing parliamentary advocacy? One of the things that we have recognized over the years of doing this work and over many other parliamentary advocacies that we have recorded across the board is that advocacy generally and parliamentary advocacy specifically thrives on having strategies and approaches that are deliberately crafted to ensure that you cause the change that needs to be caused. It's not something that you stumble on. If you want to advocate to any group of people, any group of policymakers, particularly Parliament, you've got to do it deliberately. You've got to sit down, you've got to plan, know your plan A's, plan B's, have your alternative plan. On an as and when situation ad hoc, the likelihood is that you are going to fail in that particular process. It's also important to recognize your key audience, which are usually the primary audience, which are usually the policymakers or the legislators. Members of Parliament are battling with having to deal with the gamut of things that we spoke about earlier on, sorting out their constituents on funeral expenses and hospital bills, and having to deal with some of the promises that they made inadvertently, and fearing that they are going to lose the next elections, as against the things that you want them to cause a change on. Your extractive advocacy, your budget advocacy. They have one part of their mind thinking about all of the things that should win them the next elections. And you are also coming to them with your demands. If you are unable to balance the effect of having a good understanding of this group of people and the things that they go through on a daily basis, meanwhile, honestly, it's not really thinking about the kind of advocacy that you are looking at pushing to him. Because you come to him every day talking about extractives, and he is thinking about the next elections. So having a very good understanding of the audience, the things that makes them tick, the things that bother them. Somebody spoke around the table about how having a deep understanding even of the political terrain, because this is a political exercise. If you don't understand the terrain, you will not be able to advocate effectively. We have spoken already about the fact that it's a deliberate process. It's not an event. It happens over time. It is not a one-off situation. And it sometimes starts from informing members of Parliament, trying to persuade them, and then of course it moves them to action. So at the beginning, you recognize that there is a lot of information that you are churning out. They've got to trust you. They've got to trust that the information that you are giving is solid. It gets to a point where you build that confidence, the relationship is built, you get to persuade them effectively, and then you move into action. Parliamentary advocacy requires that you build support and momentum. Oftentimes, we like to go solo as civil society organizations in the work that we want to take the praise all alone. Meanwhile, partnering and joining hands with one or two other organizations will make our work even more effective. We are doing an advocacy in the world of Parliament, yet it talks about the mining community down there in the communities. How are you engaging community radio as key strategic partners to make sure that whatever is happening in the world is being produced down there? And this is also very important for the work that we do. It is conducted by groups of organized citizens. The MP is thinking about the next elections most of the time. Can you blame the MP for thinking about the next election? Absolutely. As executive directors of even civil society organizations, we are thinking about the next funding, are we not? So it is not wrong for the MP to think about the next election. But once the MP is thinking about the next election, it means that it provides an opportunity for you as a civil society advocate. Because who are the people that are going to grant the MP the mandate for the next election? It's the people, right? And so if you are able to connect your advocacy to the people, so that the MP thinks that it is the people that are demanding this, the very people that are going to retain you that are demanding this, the likelihood that they will jump on board is high. We have a very, sorry? All the MPs?
MPs have the same side.
Absolutely. We have the same constituents. And so once we have the same constituents, how do we plug our advocacy to these constituents? Oftentimes, advocacy is seen as those of us in this room, plush hotel, conference room, we are the best brains, we can think about the things and go to Parliament. We don't connect it to the citizens. Usually when the MP sees that, really, I come to Freetown and that's the only time I hear about this advocacy. When I go to my constituency, nobody really talks about this. Really, should I bother my head about this? Because it's not an issue on the ground. Whilst in some of the advocacy that will be very integral on, while it is going on at the national level, there is a lot of mobilization on the ground level so that work goes on. However, it it's important to distinguish between advocacy and protest. Most often than not, we consider advocacy as merely protest. What is advocacy? Advocacy is when we are able to hold a placard and we are able to storm AU Drive and we can churn out the numbers and chant war songs to make sure that our people listen to us. Advocacy goes beyond that. Advocacy is about providing information. Advocacy is about persuasion. Advocacy is about lobbying. Advocacy is about engagement. Advocacy is even about education, building the capacity of the policymaker because they cannot know it all. And all of these things are very important. So now, let's now look at quickly lobbying as a key element in parliamentary advocacy. Of course, when we talk about lobbying in some of our contexts, it becomes a very strange word. We know the word, we can relate to it, but we find it very strange in our local context because many of us do not belong to parliamentary systems where the lobbying system is well structured, where there are identified corporate lobbyists, who can do the engagement. Most often than not, we as civil society organizations will have to be doing a lot of the lobbying. And I decided that I'll use the picture that comes up in the next slide to be able to show on something. Then can we move to the next slide? In the next slide, when it comes up, you will see a lobbyist, a civil society person, taking a stroll down the street with a member of parliament, a legislator, and having a conversation on a particular subject matter. That is to the root of lobbying. Because you see, in the world of parliament, when they are debating the issue, you and I have no voice in that world. You and us may have engaged them by writing petitions and writing recommendation letters and what have you. But if those petitions do not get projected by somebody who is seated in the world of parliament, in the House of Parliament, and has a voice in that particular house, everything that you or you did comes to naught. We've had civil society organizations that have come to tell us that, well, there were times that you have to even sit in the public gallery in your parliament and you'll be texting the members of parliament as the discussion goes on. The honorable member, we are seated in the public gallery, we are observing, please, this conversation, can you take it from this angle? Can you read paragraph 2 of this material that we provided for you? Because we don't have audience in the house. And to be able to get our advocacy goals, we need to build that particular relationship. So here you are seeing a picture where a civil society guy and working with parliament, aligning on the fact that there is a need to mount political pressure by building a citizen literacy and awareness on the issue, of audit and all of that. The civil society person is also providing something. This can only happen because they build that relationship over time. They have an understanding of where they want to get to. It's not easy to come by. It takes a lot of time. Earlier on, one of the answers to the question in the room is that at the beginning, there is mistrust, but over time, you are able to build that kind of relationship if you are persistent and you continue without being fed up. Now, while we go ahead, if you have any questions in the online audience, please do well to put them in the chat. If you have any questions here also, I'll do well to take a few of them. I'm just trying to quickly run you through the slides because, like I said, these slides will be shared, number one. The video will also be available online for us to be able to take a look at. And this is a very extensive course that has been broken down into quick part presentations. And so not all of the things can be covered extensively. Now, we're going to move to advocacy strategy and how it impacts on parliamentary advocacy. So if you look at this chart that you see on your screen, it gives a 5-step approach to strategizing for advocacy. And these are things that as advocates, as civil society leaders, we already know. We are just trying to see how it connects to parliamentary work. Of course, there is a need for us to identify the problem. There is a need for us to create a vision or create the objectives for which we are trying to advocate on. that we have too many problems in our communities. We identify our objective because for our civil society, a lot of times it's donor driven. So what is the objective that you stated in your project proposal here and there? You can always pull it. But we fail in mapping the terrain. What does that mean? Who will be our allies in Parliament to allow this to go through? Who will be the people that will oppose this? Because remember that everything will have allies and will have the people that are opposing it. Who are our civil society friends that we can work with? Who are the parliamentary staffers that we can work with? Who are the development partners? We have to map the terrain so critically. And this is important in Parliament because these are politicians, they have political interest to serve. They have next elections interest to serve. Sometimes they even have the interest of other lobby, groups to be able to serve, which will be opposing some of the things that we are talking about. It's about the mining agreement, and people are opposing it, and civil society is advocating against it. Remember that the people that want the mining concessions are advocating for it, and they may have bigger budgets than you do. Being able to effectively map the terrain is important. After we have mapped the terrain, identified all of the very major stakeholders, there is a need for us to explore which tactics work. And by tactics, go ahead, roll that. Let me just run you through quickly the 5 advocacy strategies, the 5 categories of advocacy strategies that we like to place this under broadly. And particularly important for the parliamentary advocacy. The first is collaboration, which involves collaboration. Working with Parliament a lot of times must be about cooperation. Parliament can be overly antagonistic. I mean, you can't mince words about that. When you step on the wrong toes in Parliament, you can be alienated terribly. And all the things that you want to do will come to naught. Remember that we said that we as civil society, we don't legislate, we don't appropriate budgets. They are the people that do it. And there is a need for that relationship building. So collaboration, cooperation, building partnerships, like what you are trying to do in Sierra Leone about having signed an MOU with Parliament or civil society Parliament engagement, like what the Liberians are doing with the civil society network of parliamentary engagement organizations, like the case in Ghana. It allows for a good relationship between civil society and Parliament. That is usually where you start from. There is also the bit about education. We must not forget that in dealing with Parliament, in advocating to Parliament, we do it at our own peril if we assume that because they are members of Parliament, they must know everything about the subject matter. And that because they've been elected, they have a mandate to do the right things. Sometimes there are many members of Parliament who have told us in many of the advocacies across various countries that, if we knew that these were the issues, we would have probably debated differently on the floor of Parliament. But we did not know. You people assumed that we knew. I keep going back to the right to information advocacy process in Ghana. And I was amazed how the information that came from the African Union model law on access to information became very useful to the members of Ghana's parliament in developing the RTI law. And this was made available to them by civil society. They did not know about it at all. And so would you have faulted them if they had passed a law that does not conform to that? No. Most often than not, we assume that members of Parliament must know, and that is not the case. So let's invest a lot in educating them, in informing them, presenting them analysis papers, gathering data, providing it to them. When members of Parliament start to see civil society advocating as an alternative research hub for them to be able to have what they need to do their work effectively, the work of Parliament goes on more effectively. There's also the persuasive part, lobbying them, negotiating, without compromising your stance, of course. And by this persuasive part, we are not talking about those ones that requires underhand dealings, obviously not. But being able to sit with them and give them reason why they must be able to vote in a particular direction. They must be able to debate in a particular direction. This is very, very important. Of course, there are the last 2 strategies, which in our advocacy training we say should be the first three you can run simultaneously, you can run alongside. The last two, you are very careful in getting to those levels. You do that when all hope is lost and you think that is the only way to go. For example, you've been trying to cooperate with Parliament, collaborate with them, you've provided them information, trying to lobby them, persuade them on a particular bill. You've told them how it's unconstitutional to pass that particular bill in the form in which it is. They go ahead and they pass it. Your best bet after it has been passed and has been probably accepted to is to go to the highest court of the land for some form of constitutional interpretation to declare it as unconstitutional. So yes, you can be able to. And then there is a confrontational bill, direct action, protest. Usually, if you want to continue to maintain relationship with Parliament over time, you resort to that at the very, 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 very tail end when it becomes the only route. In fact, we say that as much as possible, that shouldn't be gotten through. Unfortunately for us, in many of the countries that we have trained on parliamentary advocacy, in many of the countries that we have trained on parliamentary advocacy, they have not come back. In many of the countries that we have trained in parliamentary advocacy, these top three that has been settled are relegated to the background and they start from the bottom. The confrontation. You are our lawmakers and we elected you and you are not doing this. You must do this. We are coming to occupy Parliament and pickets in the House of Parliament. Meanwhile, you have provided no information, you have provided no alternatives, you have provided no education, you have not given the opportunity to engage, and yet protest and confrontation become the way to go. Once that happens, they gradually move away from you. And remember that when you are, you have to have a seat at the table to be able to influence things. If you are not called to the table, you can shout all you like on top of the room. Nobody really will listen to you. The best that you can do is to go back to the constituency and influence people not to vote for the member of Parliament. But that would have been 4 years or 5 years of a lot of things having happened. So this is also very, very important things to note in our parliamentary advocacy. In parliamentary advocacy, you must also identify strategic entry points. And we cannot continue to speak enough about this. Remember that every single slide in this presentation and in the Molares presentation from last week, the first part of this, talks about strategy. Because advocacy in general and parliamentary advocacy specifically is strategic work. You must identify who are the key stakeholders and how do you work with them. Some of the entry points could be the parliamentary leadership. There's a leader of government business in Parliament. There are leaders of the various, minority groups in Parliament. Usually, they are the people who go into conclave with the speaker to be able to have leaders meetings to agree on a few things. When you have people like that on your side, you can be rest assured that some of the things will get onto the agenda. There are the parliamentary committees. How well you build relationship with the committees, and the committees is made up of both parliamentarians, elected officials, and parliamentary staff. Sometimes we forego working with the parliamentary staff at our own peril. We think that the elected officials are the. But in countries like yours and mine, where high attrition rates, high MP turnover is the order of the day, working collaboratively and effectively with parliamentary staff who are on committees is important, because that's the only way that you are able to obtain the knowledge, and the knowledge can be passed on. Because Mr. Rogers, who is in this room, has been in Parliament for well over a decade. He has seen several members of Parliament who have come and left. The knowledge that he has is still supporting the institution of Parliament, whether attrition is high or low. If we as civil society work out our strategies around the elected officials only, and they leave because they are voted out, the resources would have been wasted. And so how to do a combination of the elected officials and the staffers in Parliament is important. Parliamentary groups, in some countries you have special groups on gender, special groups on SDGs, special groups on openness, special groups on different topics, tuberculosis, parliamentary friendship associations, and what have you. These could be very useful, elements that you work with advocacy through. It's funny, but there are these new members of parliament also as a very important strategic entry point. Sometimes we lament about how when parliamentarians change, it affects the work of parliament. But there are new blood that comes in. Many of them want to rise to prominence. And they want to align to something that will make them rise to prominence quickly. So unlike the old guys who know all the tricks of the game, they are willing to engage. Yes, they may not have a big voice in the world of parliament, but you know that you have a group of allies who, even when they go for their indoor meetings, they are able to feed you information because they know you will project them. In many of the countries where we have led advocacy, we have identified parliamentary champions, MPs as champions on a particular subject matter. You know that this MP is your champion on open government partnership, OGP. So whenever OGP matter is coming up, you know you can draft a statement for that particular MP, and the MP will read it on the floor of parliament, for you. You can be able to work with in that regard. But we usually also forget our parliamentary libraries, parliamentary research department, parliamentary documentation services as very important entry points for advocacy strategy. Parliaments are houses of records. Everything that happens there are archived through Hansards, through votes and proceedings, through their order papers, through committee reports. We must engage with these materials if our advocacy is to go properly. During the last elections in Ghana, Parliamentary Network Africa did a campaign. The two leading politicians who were running for president are politicians who actually served, each of them actually served 12 years in Parliament. During the same period, they were peers in Parliament. So former President Obama and current President Akufo-Addo both served 12 years in Parliament in 1996 to 2010. During the period, Parliamentary Hansard was able to get us to know what their thoughts were, what some of the debates they made on anti-corruption, on gender, on, so that although there are no both debate records, official debates, records of each member of parliament codified in the Parliament of Ghana, we could go into the Hansard and match President Akufo-Addo's comments in 1997 on anti-corruption against President Mohammed's comments in 1999 on anti-corruption, and weigh it against their manifesto promises on anti-corruption now that they are seeking power. Because we're able to, delve deep into parliamentary records, parliamentary libraries, parliamentary research. These are very important points for legislative advocacy. And when you miss out on them, yes, you have an advocacy. Yes, you will tick your boxes, write a fine report for whoever is funded, but the impact becomes very minimal. Absolutely. Absolutely.
On the parliamentary
Yes.
try to them constituency matching what they said in
On the
parliament.
floor. Training, we like to encourage you a lot to engage with these boards of that. Now, speaking of which then, it is important now to look at, and at this point, if you have any questions in the chat box, if you have any questions here in the room, we can allow for that. My colleagues who are monitoring the chat box will monitor for me if there are any questions that come up in there, and then we'll be able to take them. Now, So do you have any questions? Do you have any questions?
Again, on that,
Yes.
the current debate we are having now on the media, for those doing gender, work, I'm seeing the media in Ghana like Jeremy is bringing out interstate law. They are explaining to people about landlords, tenants, and whatever. That documentary, that thing is going on constantly. I have gone to our how do they call it, bar association. They said no, they don't have the time. But then the gender people are on the radio because it's a burning issue in country and they want to take parliament. So now the debate is there. They are coming back to parliamentarians and this is the law. As you are going to get that gender bill, let's go back to the laws we have enacted. This is what is happening. These are the examples. So they bring in lawyers, they bring in advocates to explain, and it has been very
and media can be very useful. Media can be very useful in this whole advocacy process, and we'll be coming to that. Radio stations, television stations can serialize some of these things, but even you are having websites who are putting them in infographics, putting them out there to educate the citizens.
You talked about engaging and lobbying. I think I spoke about the gender here. In as much as women say we are all yearning for this bill, gender and women's empowerment bill, the process, the steps that are taken point. We cannot pilot a gender bill and leaving the female caucus out of it. Mind you, female caucus are the women representing Parliament. They are the ones that should lobby their colleagues. And if you, as a minister or an executive, live in that critical and important arm of legislators in the entire process, how do you expect such bill to go through Parliament? They always say women do not support women. And the gender empowerment bill is one such bill that will benefit all the women, including men. All the women of this country, including men, minimum 30%. But now, if I'm a legislator, I am the one that is tasked with the right and responsibility to legislate, to debate in the well of Parliament, and processing such an important bill, and you did not countenance me. Legal part of it between the side of the MP and the ministry. And as women, civil society, not been consulted, leader of opposition has not been consulted, leaders of other political parties, the female caucus, and the chairperson for the gender committee has been left out. Serious oversight. Now, do you think that bill would pass into law? They're waiting, and they're going to throw it out. So lobbying and advocacy is key in the parliamentary environment. If you want anything in Parliament, you have to lobby, and you Parliament. You want a bill on mind? Your first point of entry is the chair. You have to be friends with the chair yourself. It was easy because the chair now feels like he owns the process. And the chair would now lobby the leadership and his colleagues because now it's part of the process. You come through his office or his or her office first. So for us women and civil society, media, all women of Sierra Leone, we need to speak truth to power. Legislators need the respect and we must accord them that respect. Lobbying, advocacy, and respect is what is needed. Thank you. You see?
That's why Andrew will look at us and just say, you have to step up to get what has been.
Let the minister start first. Let the minister.
Now, this
And
goes
you
to
have
the
a lot
point.
of credit. You have a lot of credit because ministers have come and gone.
Yeah.
And she has taken this that far. She has gotten cabinet approval. It would be better than a cap and a tap on her shoulder if she's able to succeed. The person has been, but she must do it.
And you see, the thing about understanding the political context, understanding the different stakeholders is what has been practicalized through this presentation. Sometimes you may be doing, as the advocates, as a civil society organization helping to promote this, you may be doing all the right things. You know, you may be working hard, you may be having sleepless nights, writing very powerful briefs and all of that, but you are not engaging the right people, or you have left out a certain group. And oh yes, the kind of institution that Parliament is, they'll wait for you. You know, they'll wait for you until that time when you fall on your own sword and you die an unnatural death that looks like a natural death.
We have the same problem with that extract. We have an office like the enemy. Everybody says it's proud, it's big. It doesn't go to anybody. What happened was that we had a meeting, they wanted to take Parliament with a lot of things that we were against. The sooner we got the win, I ran to Parliament. I went to the chair of the committee, explained to him, went to the leader of government, went to the opposition leader, who was chair of the Mines Committee, Honorable Chenoba. I went to all of them and then they said, you don't worry, go and wait. We'll wait for him to bring it. If he brings it, we'll throw it out until he goes back and do the needful. And then later the man got the ring and said, that day I met them discussing this gender thing. That they are waiting until it reaches them, then they will ask. And
then we are better able to do the work together. So no, it is not bad at all for Parliament to provide resources, for government to provide resources to civil society to jointly advocate. In fact, in many jurisdictions, some of the biggest funders are the state. Many of us here as civil society organizations receive funding from the USAIDs of our times and the GIZs of our times and the KFWs of our times and the National Endowment for Democracy of our times. It's coming from government sources.
So I always have to hear we have done it.
Ministry of Finance.
No, we have done it as people are arguing that can we take money from mining companies or government? I say yes. If he brings money from it's from the government of GIC from the German government. Why are we here saying with this donor fatigue, we don't want money from our government? When there is a force within a person within the Ministry of Finance across countries for civil society. There is
However,
we should not compromise.
Absolutely.
That was this compromise your value.
Yes, and I'll take yours.
I have taken that from my Minister of Mines when Corona started. The mining companies were giving huge stuff that they have started spending on communities, which wasn't true. So what I did was that I went up to them. I said, we don't have the resources, but we need to find out. Because at the end of the day, under the AITI, the companies are coming to project huge sums of money that this is what they have spent in our community. And government has nothing to show for it. So we want to go and interrogate. Can we do a joint trip? Government funded it. We went out, we brought our report. It was independent.
And this process was transparent. That's the most important thing. That the process is transparent. The outcomes are independent, and it is not it's not influenced really by government.
What should I say? Okay, I think it starts with policy of the organization you run as a civil society person. I think that's where you have to live that. Having money from any other institution, be it government, is primary intentions to serve the people. And also, yeah, that's just the practicals. I'm a civil society person for over 12 years in the country. I grew up there, and it's been practical. Okay, we're having a huge amount of colleagues, civil society members here. The primary objective of taking such money or them being operational primarily is not for the citizens. You see civil society organizations being formed for a particular occasion or event. So such will take money for their own purpose. But when it comes to delivering services and accountability for the great good of the citizenry, in my view, you can have money from government or parliament. In as much as she has said, the object should be for the greater good. I think that's where I'm going to come to.
Yes, and that's about, I mean, the fact is that once we are demanding, once we will go back to demand accountability, once we will go back to demand transparency and what have you, these things must be exhibited in our own work. You cannot play double standards. You cannot be that group that is saying, Parliament, you are not accountable, yet in our own provision of resources that are provided to us by the state, we also do not account to the people that actually are put us there. Let's continue. Now, this slide on your screen, just like the previous slide, is of those two broad actor base that comes up in the work of Parliament. The first actor base is the Parliamentary Assembly itself, the elected officials, and of course the Parliament. Many people have different names for these different groups, but understanding and navigating these parliamentary community folks effectively is a very good way of going. You must know that the Legislative Assembly, of course, led by a Speaker or the President of the House, constituted by elected officials, they represent constituents, they have a defined period or tenure, so they would leave at some point in time. They work in chamber, in committees, and in constituencies. But you must also understand the dynamics of the parliamentary service people, usually led by a clerk or a secretary general in some of the instances. It is made up of civil servants. Usually they have they leave upon retirement, some of them. They provide procedural advice. And so a lot of the things that members of parliament come to even say on the floor of parliament are things that have been advised to them by their procedural clerks. We have seen many instances where the procedural clerks even write, some of the The next slide is simply our 10-point takeaways, and that's where I want to end this. The 10-point takeaways of parliamentary advocacy, which is important for us to note, that is always have in our back pocket when advocating to parliament. The first is you.
10 points à noter.
You cannot seek to influence what you do not know. And that is why, yes, you hear a lot of people talk about how standing orders is the Bible of Parliament. You must know it in and out if you've got to advocate to a particular parliament. You must understand the practices and procedures. You may not be able to have a thorough, absolute understanding of it, just like a clerk of parliament would, but you must have an understanding of it at the level which your work actually, takes. The subject matter that you are advocating on, you must have technical knowledge, deep technical knowledge on that subject matter. That's the only way parliament takes you seriously. If what you are providing to them is simply what they know, then really, why must they listen to you? Because you are adding no additional layer of information to their work. So the subject matter that you are covering, it is important that you have technical expertise. And that is why it even goes to make a point about how coalitions, network of civil society organizations working on a particular area, extractives, budgets, and what have you. Once we put our heads together, we are able to come up with better analysis on a particular issue that can be presented to Parliament, rather than just one organization's knowledge. Deep understanding of the issue you are advocating to Parliament is of prime importance. The importance of building relationships cannot be overemphasized when it comes to parliamentary. You should be able to pick up the phone and call a clerk to a parliamentary committee to ask the clerk that, yes, Mr. My brother, I know that this has not been released, it has not been made public yet, but you know how we do it. When you give me a copy by my phone, I will not. We have that gentleman's agreement. And sometimes confidential information are divulged to you, not because you are going to use them for any untoward purposes, but so that you are ahead of time. And these things come up with relationships. Journalists and relationship building is but journalism is one of the areas where relationship building counts a lot. Journalists cut their sources through the people that they build relationships. So sometimes there will be a high-level political meeting where there's somebody there who is just recording and sending it via WhatsApp voice note or texting here and there. The same kind of relationship is needed. But this relationship should be the kind of relationship that does not still compromise your stance. The kind of relationship that allows you to, like they say, the mouse does. It will bite, but to blow beautiful air onto the area that it has bitten, so that you don't feel the bite. By the time you finish it, I've actually eaten up all of the things that you actually have on there. You need to build relationships. Advocacy, point number 4, advocacy is a sustained effort. If you want to touch and go, advocacy, especially parliamentary advocacy, is not your area. How do you connect your parliamentary advocacy to long-term arrangements? If it's about your 6 months, 1 year, 1.5 year donor-funded project, then I'm sorry, you will just be pouring a cup of water into the sea. You have absolute effect after the water in your cup has actually run out. The 5th point that we have seen is that there is the power of coalition building and the benefit of an effective secretariat. There are times when the hurly-burly of life and of our civil society work makes us too busy, running after several kinds of things, and so we don't keep the focus. Until your advocacy have a system that has an eye to the ball, somebody following the process consistently, you will always miss out on the juicy information. And by the time the media reports it and you get to hear about it, you've lost your chance. And really, when you lose your chance, your best bet will be to go on maybe and grab 1 or 2 things, shout and chastise. To what end? And so it's about having a deliberate system with effective secretariats that are following the process. Very, very, very important. You must link your advocacy to everyday issues. That is the only way that members of parliament will think with your advocacy. And members of parliament are successful in making people think that access to information is just to help journalists to publish all manner of things. You will not win public support. But if you're able to tell the people in those rural communities that access to information means that this bridge that is supposed to be constructed, which has not been constructed, you can walk into your district assembly's office and be able to ask when it's supposed to be constructed, and because the law is on your side, the information will be provided to you. Or you are able to make the person in the communities know that this particular money that was embezzled, through corrupt means, could have built 76 classroom unit blocks, or could have built a hospital in every district. It brings the conversation home. It makes them relate to the thing that you are talking about. But if it's always about the abstract, then they cannot relate to the issue that you are talking about, and usually miss out. Number 7, the power of the media. I cannot emphasize this enough. Yes, as an organization, we have a big bias in favor of the things that the people will be about. All the things that you have engagements with in private meetings and what have you, they know that they cannot go out there. People really do not take them seriously. If they know that the press will actually be covering it, or the press will be taking it seriously, a lot of things are done very differently. And media in parliamentary advocacy must not be seen when they are seen as an afterthought, as a group of people who must be called to a press conference only to announce the results. That is when even their reportage will just be a cut and paste from your press conference and press release. They publish it once, speak about it once on radio, and that's really it. Because honestly, the guy who has come to the press conference does not understand the issues. They were not part of it from the very beginning. Parliamentary advocacy requires that you are working with media every step of the way. And that is why, especially press associations that works in parliament, become very, very important. And that is why we must all join hands to make these press associations effective and strong. We have a very important role to play. Number 8, must parliamentary advocacy be confrontational or collaborative? Must it be confrontational or collaborative? Our experience over the period is that sometimes it's confrontation, sometimes it's collaborative. Don't make your advocacy always confrontational. You will lose out on it. You must be as collaborative as possible, but if the need comes for you to speak truth to power, you must be willing to. Leaders respect people who can speak truth to power. Please remember that in legislative advocacy, a one-size-fits-all situation does not apply. A one-size-fits-all situation does not apply. The things that work well in Sierra Leone may not work well in Liberia because Sierra Leone is a unit, Liberia is a bicameral. The things that work well in Ghana as a unicameral parliament may not work well in Cote d'Ivoire, which may also be a unicameral parliament, but runs the parliamentary system rather than the out-and-out presidential system. So you must understand the local terrain, you must understand the local dynamics and work effectively. So what are our key takeaways from today's meeting? Our key takeaways are that parliamentary advocacy is a process and not an event. Parliamentary advocacy must be done deliberately. Parliamentary advocacy requires strategy. Parliamentary advocacy requires relationship with various stakeholders in the parliamentary space. Parliamentary advocacy requires that you work as groups, teams of civil society organizations to make your voice louder. And parliamentary advocacy requires that you plug your advocacy to the local situation so that the citizens can connect to the advocacy. Because for members of parliament, it's about the next election, and if the thing does not border on the next election, really, not too much will happen. On that note, I will pause here and ask that if there are any questions, even as we look forward to wrapping up this our session, I'll take them. If there are any contributions, my colleagues will be checking the chat box to see if there are any questions. So let me hand it over to Melvin at the back. For those of you who are online, if you have any questions, you can put it there. I will attempt to address them.
Thank you very much, Sandy. My question is, are lobbyists civil society activists?
Are lobbyists civil society activists? Civil society work versus lobby. What's the difference? Okay. Any other question? So I'm sure that commercial lobbyists. Is that your the essence of your question?
We are discussing parliamentary lobby. And in other parliaments, they have lobbyists and they are clearly defined rules as to how they do their lobby. Because
and they are commercial.
They are commercials. So how for the parliamentary community, can you say lobbyists? Because we know some receive funding for for lobbying on legislation.
So the clear distinction, I think we alluded to it also in the presentation. In legislative advocacy, just like any form of advocacy, lobbying is an integral strategy in advocacy. Integral. However, lobbying must be, we must understand that there are different contexts when it comes to lobbying. There are some country contexts where you have corporate lobby institutions who are provided funding by organizations, corporate organizations often, who have interests and ask them to go influence the process on their behalf. Remember that even as civil society organizations, we have project objectives, which seeks to influence certain changes to happen. Sometimes we receive funding from organizations that align with those project objectives. The significant difference line that must be navigated so that the process does not come to corruption. And that is the very reason why, even for civil society organizations, there are many jurisdictions where funding that comes from there will tell you that you cannot use resources to, as it were, influence a legislator to take a certain kind of decision. So the difference here is the objective for which the lobbying is being done. Is it being done with the motive to influence unduly through corrupt practices and means, or are we creating the platforms for us to discuss the issues, persuade the right decision makers to be able to make decisions on our behalf and for the common good and interest of people that are there any questions on the chat box? I saw that there were other.
Sorry.
I come to you.
To him. What you just asked, I want some little clarification.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. No, what he's asking, I want to understand. What if one plays both role in separate events, separate activities?
How's that? Please explain further.
Example, a lobbyist can actually have the parliament being required to do something, and that person is a civil society person. Will that undermine his reputation, and does that really discredit him as a civil society person? Or
so, for the first person you are describing as a lobbyist, you are describing somebody who comes to influence the member of parliament with all manner of perks and
one instance.
Yes, in one instance. And in the other instance comes in the same side of the court and says that, for the public good, let's work together. Blah, 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 blah. Obviously, what this does to you is that it breaks your credibility. It kills your ability to be able to.
So it should not be done.
So once, as civil society, lobbying must be done consistently as part of our work. However, it's not. It must be ethical. I think that should be the summary. It must be ethical, and there are rudiments towards ethical lobbying. There's a question in the chat box. Amadou say, I think Amadou is from the Gambia. He's asking. He says, "Hi Sami, thank you very much for the brilliant presentation. What is your advice for CSOs newly formed with passion to work around parliamentary advocacy? Sometimes MPs may demand for certain allowances after attending events organized by CSOs. How do you think newly formed organizations can deal with this dilemma?" Okay. I would have been surprised if this question had not come from the course of our presentation about the cost of parliamentary advocacy. And yes, I'll bring the mic. Let me just let the thoughts here and there. Country context matters. I must start from that particular one. There are some places where it's ridiculously expensive to engage parliamentarians on a particular case. Why? So the expense is not monies that you, in fact, the expense in those places usually does not become money that you will put in their pocket. But that's how it runs. You want to work with a parliamentary committee. They say, well, we don't want the meeting to happen in parliament. Usually we have distractions. our constituents are coming around and all of that, please take us to country lodge. We want to relax over a 3 and 4 day period so that we can have the peace of mind to be able to engage. I don't know about laptops. I will not be caught on a live presentation talking about laptops. Especially when I know what the laptops start doing. Now that can be expensive because for 4 days you are paying for bed and breakfast in that expensive hotel. For 25 people, and for 25 people in the community, and you are giving, allowances and what have you. That can be expensive. Now, those may be legitimate payments because you pay the hotel, you pay for food, you pay for out-of-station allowance or whatever it is. But that makes the advocacy overly expensive, and that makes you now want to demand more from the member of parliament than what ideally is supposed to be ethical. In some instances, also in some country jurisdictions, the reason why these off-site meetings happen is that the parliament itself does not have conducive meeting rooms and meeting grounds for some of these things to take place. And so you are forced as civil society always to go off-site to be able to have some of these engagements. One of the experiences that we have had over time has shown that when Parliament believes that the information you are providing is valuable, technical, almost priceless, there are times when you want to compromise on some of these things. As much as possible, use the tools that are available to you. If you're a small organization that does not have the funding that will be able to gather people in Radisson or in Country Lodge or wherever it is, please don't use that approach. Use some of the other approaches that are one of the other things that I also noticed, and I noticed this, and that's why we are very big about integrating media in some of these advocacy things. And this may not apply in your respective country, so you pick and choose where it applies. But we are sharing with you some of the best practices around the day. Whenever we have gone into project conversations, advocacy conversations with members of parliament, and they've recognized that these are conversations that also involve members of the press. For example, we are advocating on extractives. Yet we have been able to build capacity of some media persons, some journalists who are extractives experts, reporters who are experts in those. So whichever meeting that we go around these extractive things, we sit with them and they are coming in as knowledgeable experts. Politicians, as they are, usually fear to make certain demands when the press is available. It's present. That has worked in certain places. In some places, you can have politicians who say, to hell with your press, we'll make our demands nonetheless. But and all of that. And your first deputy speaker will come for the posting ceremony also. Now, simple answer to them is that the civil society organizations that you see today have been working with these people when they were new entrants to parliament. We built the relationship. They became committee ranking members and deputy chairpersons. They became chairpersons. We worked with them. We supported their work. We provided them information. They became minority leaders. Some came from the CSOs. They became minority leaders. They became majority leaders. You provided them. So when he becomes a speaker, You know, the Speaker of Ghana's Parliament present was a lead advocate for the passage of the Right to Information Law. Was a lead advocate. And so every civil society conference on right to information, they took him along. So he was a walking encyclopedia of right to information matters. So when he stands to speak on the floor of Parliament, he speaks with a lot of facts. As fate will have it, once he was deputy speaker, on the day that the bill will pass, he was the one in the chair that declared the bill as having passed. You know, and everybody applauded him. You know, great. So these things come with information. Yes, it can be expensive from the beginning. Yes, it can be stressful. Some people ask the question daily as we go about. How is it that you're able to work with Parliament? This terrain is a no-go area. It's not a terrain that anybody wants to work with, but it takes time. And we'll do it.
I think you have to be very honest and take it out of work. They are writing a proposal in terms of they show they are part of it and a copy of that proposal should be because if there are issues of the budgetary so the amount that agreed upon, I don't think it can work because one of what happens is they have an opinion that they don't want they're not in the document yet, and they will say or think that you have a huge amount.
I have worked is that when we started a new family, our first thing is to how do we go. After project approval, we went to then they told us about that anytime we are then they have and then we are saying why, but this is for you. You own your project. Then they said no. They are the same rank as cabinet. They even went further to bring us a cabinet paper where cabinet approved. If you are going up country to this town, this is the amount. In country is $100. Outside Africa, all those rates you are going. They said this is what we take as sitting fee. My colleagues are all angry. They said, no, we don't have this now. But then I said, no. We are beginning a journey and we need results. So let's take our time. We did. They brought the cabinet paper. And then when they brought it, then we said at that time $100 was exactly the rate. It wasn't a budget rule. Then we said, look, can we now sit and say we know this is the rate for dollars? For dollars keep going up. So can we cap how much to give you?
We went into the market.
So we yes. And then we had it. But then that project, if we would have oversized that, and that work would not have happened. The result we got was overwhelming. That we even forgot about that money, we earlier thought was too much to pay. So these are the fees, they are sitting fees, they said because that's what cabinet has. And we checked to the cabinet secretariat, they said, oh, it's for cabinet minister. But then officials said, we are in the same rank with cabinet minister. So you see the dynamics?
I'm refusing the temptation to speak to this subject. Yeah, I told the same line. And of course, I'm not going to talk about laptops. And but actually, from the legislative perspective, no parliament finally.
We have a mutual experience.
Yeah. When this current parliament was inaugurated,
some key technical issues relating to Parliament. The hope that the DSOs, etc. And that was basically speaking to but it was an opportunity, as you stated, one of the entry points. You know, so when you have new members coming, they do not really know much about Parliament. You kind of catch them young. But unfortunately, CSOs and other, we are not catch them young. And for us, through the Parliamentary Service, you know, so by the time they are 2 years in Parliament, 3 years,
The grown wings.
so please, this is a point we have to take note of the next Parliament. Because what we know is plus or minus very hard. This is important. You know, so by next year, by next election, if we had another high attrition level, we can really work. IPU is, and that's more the reason they are now kind of identifying new things to make them come. I'm very much happy, you know, because all the things I would have said, we said. In fact, you speak on as if you are one of us.
I used to be a parliamentary staff though.
No wonder. No wonder. So basically, these are the real issues, honestly. And Sierra Leone has been a pioneering kind of trailblazing kind of, you know, examples when you talk about this. And in fact, this is not the first communique or memorandum of understanding between Parliament and CSOs. We've had several, yes, I think many years back. And there was another one that has to do with the SDGs. Yes. We are the first Parliament that actually mainstreamed the SDGs in the region. And we had for a region, no, but that was really kind of made up of NGOs, support, Caritas, and stuff like that. And we started well. But again, 2018 election, almost 90% of that set of members of the Parliamentary Action Group, they all go. So I only had a couple of them that's in present Parliament. We have to start all over the place. So I'm very much happy for this. I was saying something. Yeah, before I take that, because I wanted to wrap up on the online audience, you know, so that they can understand. So that, sorry, yes, and I'll make a quick comment on this, so that they can be able to log on. So that they can be able to log on while we wrap up on here. One of the things we've also noticed across countries. One of the things that we have noticed across countries is that even amongst us as civil society organizations, because such networks do not exist, we fail to even do benchmark. And that is why sometimes it becomes expensive. Organization A goes to Parliament with a donor funding that can pay several hundreds of USD in travel allowances. Members of Parliament get used to that standard. Organization B comes with a relatively smaller budget, and MPs are thinking, but you guys, you want to take all this money and you are trying to now, because we do not benchmark. There are some projects that are more, that has more flexibility by way of its funding than the others. These are things that we can work among ourselves through such networks. Remember that members of Parliament are also communicating among themselves. You know, there are some members of Parliament who will give you what the standard is in Nigeria, and Nigeria is
I know. That's why I use that.
They will give me receipt, like I gave them. It's
Well,
documented. When they say they went, they did not have receipt. And it wasn't open.
because the standards, but these are conversations that we have to always identify. And as civil society, just like we said, as part of parliamentary advocacy, how can we strategize around some of these things? It requires a lot of brainwork. So at this point, for those of us who are online, we are grateful that you are able to join us. As always, we thank you very, very much for joining us for today's meeting, the second part of the training on parliamentary advocacy opportunities to engage in Parliament. As always, we are happy for your contributions and the questions and comments that came up. These will be put together and uploaded on our various platforms, shared with you on online, so that you can also share with your colleagues, broadly, so we can all understand. But every month, there will be some of these training sessions virtually on different subject matters. There are countries where they are working so well in scorecards for Parliament. There are countries that are doing assessments so well. There are countries that are working so well, organizations that are working so well with parliamentary